Oh, folks, I get a kick out of that tune every time I hear it because it means I'm in for a treat. It's another week of the Rec Poker podcast, and you're in for a treat too. Thanks for joining us for the show. It's Monday night, it's 7:30 Eastern. We're here live on YouTube like we are every week because I've got the best freaking job in the world, if you don't know already. My name's Jim Reid. I'm Bluffsterini in the home game and at Rec Poker Jim on the hellscape we call Twitter. And we just love these conversations that we have amongst our wrecking crew members here on the Rec Poker podcast. So I have to tell you that we're brought to you by Running Aces, the official sponsor of the Rec Poker podcast. They're located less than an hour north of the Twin Cities in the beautiful state of Minnesota. And you can find out more about them at runaces.com. Most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization, so we really depend on support from our sponsors and our premium members. And if you're a regular listener, you know that you can join, you can get a lot of great benefits for joining our free community here at Rec Poker. All it takes is an email address and a smile. But if you want to take your game to the next level, I'd encourage you to come join our premium membership. You can always get your first month for only $5 by using the code RecPoker at checkout. And if $5 is too much for you, I completely understand. We want to be accessible to everyone. And so another great way to get a month of premium membership here at Rec Poker is by making a donation of any amount to your local food bank. So if you make a donation of $1 at least to your local food bank and send us the receipt, then we'll give you a free month as well. So there's lots of ways to get involved. And thanks for getting on in here. So I see we're off to a perfect start. Last week I managed to screw up some technical stuff. John Somsky is in the booth as our producing co-host tonight, and you can find out more about him and me and everyone else here on the Rec Poker RECing Crew by going to rec.poker/crew. But you can also learn a little bit about all of our fantastic members here by just listening up because they're about to introduce themselves alphabetically by first name for your pleasure. Jump on in there, Wrecking Crew members, and let our audience know who you are.
So my name is Joe Coolis. You can find me at Joe Cool PhD, cool with a K, on Twitter, and Elvita 11 in the home game. I manage and run the PsyOps monthly workshop where we talk about psychological concepts that may have an impact on your poker game, both on and off the felt. This month, we have a special guest. Dr. Craig Savage is actually going to come on, and we're going to have he is a psychologist as well, and we're going to have some interesting conversations, I hope, concerning where we agree in terms of these psychological concepts. And he has said he's going to push back on me, so it should be a great opportunity. It'll be this Thursday at 7:30 in our normal slot.
And I am John Somsky, also known as Poker Geek MN everywhere. When I am not organizing our home games, I am failing as our producing co-host, but eventually I am able to get the sound working. And that's all I've got to say.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I'm Pet Vetter Pet Pet 33, Furry 56 in the home game, and I run a travel forum for our travel group for Rec Poker, and also a hand history review group for premium members once a month when I'm not traveling, where we go over live hands played by our members.
And I'm Rob Washington. You can find me as Rabman50 just about everywhere. And on the first and third Wednesdays of every month, you can find me and a group of premium members talking about the latest and greatest poker books.
That's right. That's Rob's book study, just one of the many fantastic events that we have going on here for our premium members. Thanks everybody for joining us. So normally here on the Monday night chats edition of the podcast, we have an interview with the fantastic person in the poker world. Unfortunately, our guest fell through today at the last minute, and so we're going to talk a little bit with our YouTube members, I hope, about some of the themes of the month that have been going on here at Rec Poker. Chris Jones, who isn't here tonight, runs our membership content, and for the last few months, the theme of the month in our learning material has been responding to different player types, different kinds of players that make different kinds of mistakes, and how we encounter these people in the wild, and the ways that we can maximize our profitability against them. So if you're in the YouTube chat, I'd love you to start typing in some sort of cliches about player types. Who are some of the players that you meet at the tables that you're playing at? What are their uh, what are their mistakes? What are the ways that they deviate from GTO? And maybe some stories about how you've taken advantage of them. So I see that Phil is available. He's already typed into the YouTube chat. And yeah, Phil, we're definitely going to be talking about your player type, the friendly curmudgeon, and how we can exploit them. Uh, but I'm going to kick it off. So we've got one in here, Phil typing in already, Old Man Coffee. So yeah, this is one of the classic uh, player types, I think. And feel free to keep going on in the YouTube chat there. If you have any questions or ideas about kind of analyzing or suggesting these different kinds of players that we might see at the table, we'll get into there. So I know John, Joe, Rob, and Kim, you've already got some ideas for some of the players or some of the mistakes that you see people making at the tables. But why don't we start with Phil's recommendation for Old Man Coffee? So I think we all know who this person is. Rob, I'm not even looking at you. No, I know you're going to raise your hand. Yeah. Uh, so Old Man Coffee, typically you'll see them referred to as OMC in forums or on Reddit or stuff like that. Uh, and basically, it's generally a person of a certain age drinking coffee at the table because they're not there to have fun. They're there to grind. Sometimes they'll be reading a newspaper or a book or something while they're there. And they're basically just there to play the very strongest hands to make very strong hands and uh, and to get paid with those very strong hands. So I'll open it up to the panel here at first. Um, what are some ways that we can exploit the old man coffee player type when they're at our table? So I know one way for me, if they're in the big blind, I'm going to be opening a wider range of hands than I normally would. I'm going to be trying to raise their big blind more often than I would because they're more likely to fold. They're playing a smaller range of hands. So raising a wider range of hands um, against their big blind is going to be profitable because they're just not going to continue that often. Another way would be to set mine against them, to kind of play speculative hands when you're deep enough against these players because they're likely to come in with very strong made hands already, big pairs. You know, you'd love for them to make one pair hand and then for you to be able to crack that hand by making two pair or a straight or a flush or a set or something like that. What here, Joe, you unmuted there. What's on your mind?
I didn't want to interrupt your strategy discussion. I was going to talk about more what some of the personality characteristics often of the old man coffee are, but
Oh, I love that.
I don't want to. So I think, as you were talking about it, we think about old man coffee as a monolith in terms of, well, they're ace hunting or they're just waiting for the hugest pairs and so on. And I think that's partially true, but a lot of old man coffee, the reason they're old man coffee and why they're there a lot and why they're there during the game is because they've come to the casino in order to substitute things that they used to do for work or in terms of socialization, right? There, a lot of times old man coffee finds other old man coffees are the ones that kind of know everybody in the casino. They're waving at everybody and saying, hey, how's it going? The dealers know them. And it's a social interaction for them. So beyond knowing to some degree that they're probably going to be tighter, right? Because they're just looking for those wins and they know that if they can wait long periods of time, they're also a population that you can probably exploit by talking to them, right? So they talk to the dealers, they talk to everybody. If you come in and you see an old man coffee sitting at the table and you haven't talked to them at some point, you're missing the opportunities because I find old man coffee tend to show you their cards more frequently than other players because it's social, right? It's an opportunity to interact with somebody. And if you're generally friendly, people will talk to you. And this particular population, I'm not trying to overgeneralize because there's cranky ass old men coffee, as well. But for the most part, they're actually a population that I like to play with because I know I can sit down, be warm, be friendly, get them to show me some of their cards, get an idea of what ranges they're playing. And sometimes they won't even bet me if they have it. They won't bet the river because I've just been nice to them. That's an exploit, right? That is a way that you can keep some of your money and for doing nothing except for being a friendly puss at the table. So I love Old Man Coffee when they're at the table, not just because I know what they're playing a little bit more, but because I can manage their social, what they're looking for in the game, to my advantage, to be able to gain some advantages on them.
That's a great point. I hadn't even thought about that, but well said. John and then Kim.
Yeah, I was just going to go into kind of like Joe did, a little bit more detail about Old Man Coffee. And keep in mind that not all Old Men Coffee are created equal. And just because someone fits the stereotype look doesn't mean they necessarily fit the stereotype play. But in general, they are there. They're not going to lose a lot of money. They are typically going to play fairly ABC, not going to get out of line, and they aren't going to be scared off by, if they've got a decent hand, they aren't going to be scared by bluffs. So the way I like to to exploit these players is, first, like Jim said, when they have not entered the pot, raise, because if they don't have a decent hand, they aren't going to be staying in. Number two, if they tend to push back, trust them. Their bluffing frequency is very low. So if you can't beat a bluff, don't bother staying in the pot. Number three, they are not going to be pushed around when they have something good. So if you have something really good, then it's time to go to Value Town and make sure, because they will pay you off if they've got something. Now, they aren't going to pay you off with second pair, but they will pay you off with top pair, top kicker. They'll pay you off with two pair. So look for when you can have them dominated, but be very afraid of being dominated by them. So don't look to put the money in there. That's kind of my general take on things.
That's a great one. I like that. Kim.
Well, I agree with everything everybody said so far, but in my sort of more recent experience, I feel that Old Man Coffee is literally and figuratively dying off. Like, I just no, I'm serious. I'm tongue in cheek, but I'm serious. Like, the older players are getting better and better as far as I'm concerned. And maybe it's just the games I play, but I really don't find a lot of Old Man Coffee stereotypical players in the tournaments. Now, maybe they're in the 1-2 games at your local card room, but that's not where I play. And I have found that there's a lot other stereotypes that I run into more often than the sort of stereotypical Old Man Coffee that these guys are describing. That's just my personal take from playing mid-stakes poker tournaments.
And of course, you know, the demographic Old Man Coffee, every year that goes by, more, you know, middle-aged coffee men are becoming Old Men Coffee, and they're still bringing some of those poker skills, you know, like the 60-year-olds, the 70-year-olds of today were the 40 and 50 years olds of 15, 20 years ago. And there were some excellent players in that group. So I think the entire poker ecosystem is getting smarter. And some of these, I know everyone is so excited to go play in the seniors event because they feel like they've got an edge on these old timers, but like, they're you too, man. Like, you're playing in, you know, that's what I think. Like, if you're playing in that tournament, think about it. There's going to be some other.
I can tell you from the super seniors this year, which is 60 and over, there's not a lot of stereotypical
Right.
Old Man Coffee players. Now, maybe that's because it's a 1K. I don't know, but it's not. They know what they are, and they've stopped playing that way.
Yeah. Joe, or yeah, sorry, John, then
I
Joe,
was
then
just going
Rob.
to
Yeah.
mention that I think the Old Men Coffee really is more of a cash game type of thing. You're going to find them at the lower level cash games. So at, your 1-3 no limit or your 2-5 no limit. And that's about as far up as they're going to go because they aren't necessarily there to play the full length of a tournament. It's kind of their socialization. So I find the true Old Men Coffee to be much more prevalent in cash games.
I love
I,
that. Joe, yeah.
I would just say at the dailies, right? But not all of us have a grand that we can put down regularly for a tournament, and a daily where they're spending $135. You'll see more of them. They're out early, right? They don't make it to the final tables very often. They're just looking to put in some money, make it through. So you'll see them there. But I would agree with Kim that once you start moving into bigger money, it just fades out. But
and Rob, watch mute unmuted there for a second. I know that one of the things you're going to say is when they lead out on the river, they always have it. What else is on your mind?
Well, I think I was just going to probably say what John just said is that you're not going to find them. You're not going to find Old Man Coffee type behavior in a tournament like you are in a small stakes cash game, the 1-2, the 1-3. They're there, they get their coffee, they sit down, and like Joe mentioned, they might read the newspaper, but they're just there to pass some time and, maybe get involved occasionally. So the way I approach that is I will be very aggressive most of the time against somebody, that player type. And then if they ever play back at all, I'll just get out of the way. The minute they take an aggressive action, whether it's leading out or raising, then I know that unless I've got the goods, I'm just going to get out of the way. But until that time, you can really put a lot of pressure on them and they're going to back down unless they actually hit something. So that's kind of the way I play that type of player.
Yeah, Joe. Joe.
The one other thing I would say, to trail on Rob is don't worry about getting bluffed on that one time, right? Because sometimes they'll get mad and they will play. They'll do something out of character for even Old Man Coffee, and that's okay, right? Because it's going to be very hard for them to sustain that. They're not going to be able to do that as a strategy. So even if you get bluffed on that one time and they show it to you because they're tacked off that you've been aggressive and aggressive and aggressive, and they're just sick of it, and they take the dirty diaper and they said, I'm going to play this on you and bluff you until, and I'm just not going to fold. All right, so you lose one hand, right? They won't do it again though, because they're not going to be able to sustain that because they will fall back into the same pattern that they did previously.
Yeah, and we talk about that a lot. The types of players that under bluff, even if they are bluffing occasionally, they're not doing it at a high enough frequency for it to be profitable for you to be bluff catching. You should just fold and let it go. And I want to follow up on the point that Joe said earlier about whether it's an Old Man Coffee or other players that are there for the social element of it. I do think being a nice person at the table, being friendly, and being, kind, speaking to them, forming a rapport will pay huge dividends. Not only you might make a new friend, but in the actual context of a poker table, people show me hands all the time. I think people decline to bet or raise on a turn or a river against me because we have a friendship. We're like buddies now at the table, and so they are going to take it a little easy. Or I've definitely had several times where people have shown me their hands and just said oh, I wouldn't normally show. I never show, but you're a nice guy, so I'll let you see it this time. And or even say things like they'll make a big bet on the river and it's just the two of us in the hand, and they'll say something like, save your money. Or and they're never lying. And I'll hum and haw. I know I'm folding, but I'll hum and haw and grudgingly fold. And then they'll show this really, really strong hand. And it's wow, that player really gave up some EV at the table, but because their priorities are different. You nailed it, Joe. They're there for the fun, for that social element. And so, I'm not saying use that against them, but if you're a naturally friendly and gregarious person, that has benefits outside of, like I say, just making friends. Yeah, what's on your mind, Joe?
Well, I just say that the sweet spot, you'll know you've hit the sweet spot is when you reach the point that you're starting to feel uncomfortable that the other players will think you're colluding with that player because they're so interested that they're almost like reaching over to show you and you're still in the hand and you're like, no, dude, I can't.
Yeah.
That's a great spot to be in. You've got control of at least one half of the table at that point because you'll usually actually get other people if you have like a good relationship with like the OMC next to you. That spreads like oil across water, right? And all of a sudden you'll have more people. And I've never, I've seen Jim do it, and it's been my experience as well. Is you create sides of the table, which is the more happy side of the table, and then everybody there is having a good time, and the other side of the table is very angry at you because you look like you're having a better time, and that's just they're bleeding information, and you're sucking that up, and at the same time, it's a lot more fun. So
Yeah, non-trivial advantage, like non-trivial benefit. Like it's a lot more fun. So we're going to kind of look at different players types today. We kind of think of players as being either tight or loose, and being aggressive or passive. And a lot of players kind of fall into these quadrants of players. So Old Man Coffee is typically tight and passive. When they are aggressive, that usually means they've made a very strong hand. And so these players are fairly easy to play against because they're somewhat predictable. The strength of their hand, maybe not the actual holdings, but the strength of their hand range is often made clear to you by their betting pattern, whether they're betting or checking, whether they're calling or raising, and then the sizes that they use. And like the gang has said, you can kind of play pretty straightforwardly against them. Sort of what Kim was getting at, though, and Rob has talked about this in the past as well, is that there are players, and of course, poker players know that other poker players are making assumptions about them and about their player types and how to exploit them. So, like Rob Washam, for instance, who could pass for an Old Man Coffee if he chose to. I'm just saying you could make it happen, Rob. You're endowed in a way that would allow that to be the case. And you, being an experienced, savvy, exploitative player, can really use that to your advantage. So I call these players the Old Man Irish Coffee, because they're sipping the coffee, but you can't tell that there's a little something in there. And they're a little more relaxed than typical OMCs are going to be. And these are the ones you really got to watch out for, the Rob Washams of the world, because they're going to sit there just pretending to be an Old Man Coffee, never bluffing. But then all of a sudden the draws don't come in and they lead into you on the river. And you're like, oh, I'm just going to auto fold here because I know this guy only bets when he has it. But these sneaky Old Man Irish Coffee characters, they know how to sneak a bluff in there every once in a while. So you gotta be aware. You gotta be aware. All right, I want to just run through some of the YouTube comments here that we've got. I love this active YouTube chat. Thanks to some new faces for showing up here today. So we got a comment from, let me see. I thought we saw one from, oh yeah, Phil Razor saying if they bet on the river, they have it 100% of the time. Yes, agreed. Mike Day says that the bar leagues are full of Old Man Coffees. Yep, that's right. I think it is. Again, because they're like hanging out and having a good time, right? Low stakes Midwestern tournament players want to see flops with about 5 limpers per hand. Yes, that's right. And and then some of the things I'm seeing in here also have to do with more passive players, limping and calling. And I think that was Mike Day as well, talking about where was it? This is such bad podcasting right now. Oh yes, I see a lot of limp callers who play fit or fold on the flop, and usually I bet 100% of the time versus that type on the flop. So let's talk about our next player type, which is sort of the wide or loose and passive player types. So these are players that want to make hands. They play a ton of hands pre-flop. They might be called calling stations. They're the kind of players that usually have a very wide gap between their VPIP and their PFR if you're a HUD stat player. And they tend to make very passive actions, and they want to limp, they want to call, they want to see flops. And let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that we can exploit these players, because we see these players all the time in lower stake recreational fields. Um, so these are another player type that you don't really want to bluff against, certainly not on like flops as much, because they're sticky. And if they have a single backdoor or like one overcard, it's going to be hard to get them off that hand until the river, because they are believers. These sticky players are real optimists that they can make a hand, that queen is coming if they just call one more bet, and they want to get that kind of dopamine response. Actually, we'll ask Joe which brain chemical it is that I'm actually referring to there. But in the meantime, Kim, yeah, you have some experience with passive wide players, right?
Yeah, but I was going to say, does this also include the sort of ABC players, like that are just trying to see flops and see if they hit? And you said it's not worth bluffing them, but maybe it is taking a
Hmm.
small stab for a very small amount, because they're going to just fold unless they have a backdoor or they have something. They're just gonna, so stabbing at this pot, I think is okay, but it should be for just a small price.
Yeah, and I actually like this exploit against players like this, where you can bet small on flops and you can even bet small on turns, because it keeps their range really wide and open. And then you just have to decide if you're going to make a big bet on the turn on the river to take it away, because usually by then they haven't made a hand. They've kind of capped their range by not raising you when you make these small bets and just calling. So you can definitely try and take it away from them, but I find it's better to do it on the river when like all hope is gone, and then they do kind of play fit or fold, like Mike was saying. Rob, why don't you jump in, then Joe, then John.
I was just going to say that yeah, you can bet on the flop against these types of players, but if they call you, then you should probably slow down on the turn unless you actually have made a hand yourself, because they've shown you that they're not going to fold. Now it's like you say, they're not going to fold till you get to the river, because they're not going to realize that they have no equity until the actual river card comes out and they don't have any equity. So
Yeah.
you can bluff them on the flop, but unless you actually have a hand, don't try to bluff them on the turn, because they're just going to call you with any type of draw that they might have, whether it's an overcard, like you said, or some gut shot straight that is very improbable. But they will call your bluff on the turn just so they can see that river card.
Yeah, they didn't drive all this way to fold. Very,
Exactly.
very familiar with that player. Joe Cools.
So, as I'm always going to talk about the player personality type, in terms of what you're looking at. So yeah, they're gamblers, but they're really not gamblers. They're superstitious, right? They don't really have a good understanding of the odds, right? They're looking at it, they remember, and you did get it right, it is dopamine. But they remember all those times where they held on and they got there, and then they won these big pots. And so that's what they're looking to get again out by the river. And so they don't want to give up very easily if they have some sort of draw, and so on. And I think that, you can use that information, like Rob said, in terms of understanding how you can bet them. But they're also the player type that I think ticks off of studied players the most, right? Because you're doing all these different things. They're coming with all this junk, and they're staying in pots that they shouldn't be. And while that's an advantage, if you think about it from an EV standpoint, it's really stinking annoying when they get there on the river and you even have a two pair, and somehow they pulled this really weird flush or straight out of the air, and then you can't believe it when they raise you on the river. You call them, because how in God's green earth could they have had both a jack and an eight? And then all of a sudden you're angry. And so I think that, when you identify a loose passive calling station, you have to steel yourself to the idea that they're going to, in many respects, cost you money when you have to fold on the river because you've been pulled all the way through trying to get there, and they got there and you did not. And if you do not recognize that that is going to happen and recognize how much money you're making when they don't, you will lose money because you will fail at the moment when it costs you the most. And that's why you have to recognize this particular population almost more than a lot of the other ones, because they're just really going to rip your heart out at some point.
Mm-hmm. And we see them a lot, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like you say, these are a lot of recreational players fall into those pitfalls of sort of superstition and poor pattern recognition and not grasping the fundamentals and the math of poker, you know, particularly well. So, you know, we see a lot of these players, and it's fun to make hands. Like it is, it's fun to make hands. And it's especially fun to make hands and then to like win a big pot against the kind of salty guy over across the table there too. Like, hey, even I enjoy that from time to time. John Somsky.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of reinforce what Joe had to say. This player type is really about hanging on if they've got any type of draw. And again, not all people are created equal, but some of them will be hanging on to a gut shot draw. Some of them will be very inelastic to bet sizing. So you're not going to bluff as much against this player, but you do need to make them pay to miss their draws. And then once they hit it, if you have evidence that they've hit it, you got to get away, because now they'll often overbet the river in order to get their money, and then you kind of have to believe them there. So, you know, you can make a lot of bets while they're going up to the river, and they're probably going to be coming along with you. So do it when you've got the best hand and you're more likely to rake in the pot.
No, Rob?
I was just going to say there's another aspect of this player. They tend to limp with strong hands because in their mind, they haven't made a hand yet until the flop or the turn or the river, right? So don't be surprised if they limp and then call your raise, and you look at that as a capped range, and they show up at the river with a pocket aces.
Yeah.
That is going to happen with these types of players because their aces have been cracked so often that they can't put more money in than a limp. And then, but of course they're going to call a raise because they got aces, for God's sakes. Why wouldn't they? So be aware that there's no such thing as a capped range with some of these types of players. They could have any two cards when they limp and call a raise.
That's a good point. It's almost like these players are sort of like bluff catching as a general line. Like they're getting into hands with, you know, made hands, but even aces is just one pair, you know. And so this is part of the problem for some of these players. So I love the way that you're putting that. We've got some good comments here from the YouTube chat. I'd like to welcome some new folks. I got some great comments here from Neil Jaworski. Welcome, Neil. So Neil says the best bluffs are when they call flop and turn and fold river. Yes, exactly. And you know, when we were talking a while ago about like pre-flop exploits and three betting, semi bluffing as a three bet, one of the great things about it is we love it when people fold to our bluffy three bets. But when they call our three bets, that actually works out pretty well for us as well, because now there's a bigger pot out there and we've got range advantage and we can win on future streets when our opponents don't make a hand. And now we win an even bigger pot than if they had just folded pre-flop and all we won was their original open raise. So similarly, post-flop, you know, if you have a read on a player that they're going to raise with a very strong range of hands, then you can do like Kim and Rob are pointing out here and bet small on flop and turn and allow them to kind of cap themselves by not taking an aggressive action. And then it's up to you to choose whether to pull the trigger on the river or not, based on the run out, based on some physical reads, you know, however you decide to make that decision. But I like the come here. So Neil follows up and says, yeah, beautiful. If they call the turn with a gut shot, they'll have a really weak range on the river and fold to your bets. That's right. And Mike Day says he loves triple barreling with small bets and then a tad bigger on the river. Exactly the same kind of thing. Phil mentions that practicing bluffing in low mid-stake tournaments is tough because you're generally playing against people that never fold, which, yeah, and that is in the low stakes games, I think folding is an art that eludes a lot of people at the table. Some of them might overfold in like very particular spots, but as a group, this class underfolds. And that means that our adjustment is to bluff less and to value bet more thinly and to use sizing to our advantage. Because the kind of players that we're describing here are generally inelastic to sizing. They're not thinking about pot odds. They're not thinking about equity. They're just kind of like playing the player. And if they're going to call for half a pot bet, they'll probably call for a 2/3 a pot bet. They might even call for 3/4 of a pot. And so that's another way that we can take advantage of this tendency. Joe.
Yeah, and so one of the things I just want to say as well, given that we sometimes have a range of people listening, is that bluffing in and of itself, when people say I don't bluff enough, oftentimes it's directed at, oh, it's to the river. It's like the guy going all the way through. But there are ways, and I think Kim had said it at the beginning of this discussion in terms of the ABC player, is that you can bluff in on two streets, but you don't have to bluff the river just because you went there, right? It's okay to give up on a bluff at any particular street. And sometimes, you know, when you look at just that small river bluff in the beginning against particularly in the ABC population, that's a bluff. And then you can shut it down. And that's still bluffing, but it's not the kind of bluff that people think about where it's like, I went to the river and I threw all my chips in the middle and I got them to fold and I had nothing.
Yep. I like that a lot. So we've got some more comment here. Neil says again, I think playing in position plays a huge role in this discussion, to be honest. You can be way more aggressive in position, in my opinion. 100%, Neil. And especially, especially in the games that we're playing, if we're thoughtful and paying attention to our opponents, they're going to give off a lot of information, not necessarily from physical tells or verbal tells, but through their bet sizing and through their actions, they're going to give off more information than savvy, veteran, experienced players. Which means that being in position is even more valuable against these players because you're going to get more information. You're going to have more actionable data when you decide whether to pull the trigger. So yeah, great point, Neil, and thanks for joining the show. Comment here. Oh, that's you, Joseph, talking about. Are we talking about tilting when we get there? So we'll see what we get back in the YouTube chat there. I like Dave Evil Roy Slade's comment. If they're a check-in, I'm a betting player type. That's right. Why don't we talk about that player type next? Let's see if we have any other comments here. Chip Extractor. Hey, Steve, welcome back. There's low stakes live players call wide early in hands, but also narrow quickly post flop, especially as absolute bet size increases. If this is true, you can build the pot exploits from these general mistakes. Yeah, nailed it, Chip Extractor. That's exactly correct. And Mike Day says, will they sometimes re-raise with premiums though? And Mike Day, here's the thing. If you're playing against opponents that raise with premium hands, great. Like if we're playing against players that raise with very strong holdings, that's what we can expect them to do when they raise. We can expect them to have strong hands. And so the way we exploit these players is by folding to their raises, into their large sizings and their aggressive actions. The tricky players are the ones that are going to raise not only with their premium hands, but also with a balanced range of semi-bluffs or just straight up air balls. It's those players that we have to worry about. There is this conception that if they have a good hand, they're going to raise and I'm going to have wasted a pot. I'm going to have wasted a bet earlier. I want to just wipe that right out of your brain. You can't control what part of your your opponent's card distribution you're coming up against. They can just have a good hand every once in a while, and you're not going to win that pot. But you can limit the amount of money that you lose in that pot. And so if players are raising with premium hands, I love it when they do that, as long as that's all that they're doing. The players that you really have to worry about are the ones that are raising with non-premium hands and doing it in thoughtful spots that because of board run out or that kind of thing, make it harder for us to know whether they have a strong hand or Rob.
Yeah, I think what he might have been talking about is we were talking about the person that limps with a strong hand.
Yes.
And then then you try to isolate them and then they re-raise you. Well, that's pretty, basically that's telling you that, yeah, they have a big hand, and if you were raising just to isolate with some medium strength hand, well, then, yeah, you can get out of the way. So I think it's very important because they're not bluffing when they do that.
Mm-hmm.
If they limp, you isolate, and they re-raise you, they're not bluffing there. They've got the goods.
And what all they've done is cost themselves money because now you're folding a lot of your second best hands that you would have continued in the hand with, you'd be c-betting with. But they've kind of capped their winnings at whatever your isolation raise was. And they feel great. They won a hand, they limped, and then you raised, and then they re-raised, so they got all these chips that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. But it's not like they definitely did not maximize the profitability of their hand. And when you think about their entire range, it's yum, yum, yum. I want to play against more of these players. Bring them to the table. I don't mind folding when I know I don't have the best hand, right? Like that's how you win at poker. All right. So Kim had mentioned earlier, sort of, are we talking about ABC players? I'm going to open this up to the group and to the YouTube chat, because when I think ABC player, I don't even really think necessarily about pre-flop ranges. I think more, it's just that they're playing straightforwardly post-flop. So whether they have like an opening range of 10% or 20% or 25%, it's that they just like don't get out of line post-flop. So I guess I'll ask the group and I'll ask the YouTube chat as well. What do you mean when you refer to someone as an ABC player? So I guess for my own definition, it would be someone who just makes sort of conventional betting lines, conventional bluffing lines, conventional sizes, and they're not original. They're playing sort of out of the textbook. They're not creative. And so it doesn't mean that they're never bluffing, but they're probably just choosing like the best possible bluff spots. The semi bluffs where they actually have so much equity, it's not even clear if it's a bluff or not, like two overs and a flush draw or something like that. That's kind of what I think of when I think of ABC players, is that they're just generally straightforward post flop. Rob, what about you?
I think that's very true. I consider that, you've heard the expression fit or fold.
Yes.
And I think that's what an ABC player is typically playing, a fit or fold type of game. In other words, they'll get involved pre-flop with a wide range, but as soon as the flop hits, everything changes, because now it's dependent on whether they hit or not. It has nothing to do with anything else other than, did I hit this? If I did, I'm betting. If I didn't, I'm checking.
Yep, I like it. So we do have a comment in the YouTube chat from Phil saying ABC players, the generally only opening with the top 10% of hands. So yeah, so Phil's giving them kind of a tighter opening range as well. I'm curious to see if other people correlate that particular player type with a pre-flop range as well. Joe?
Yeah, not to disagree with Phil, because every word that comes out of that man's tweets and mouth is absolute gold. But I think that when you look at ABC players, I think there is a little bit more of a range. I think that the OMC will tend to be more fit or fold in terms of what they bring into the middle. But you can have a lot of people who may even play a little bit more passively. and then they're only playing if they hit the flop, and they're really exploitable because you can really shut them down, like Kim was saying, with small bets that shouldn't work, but they just go away. Particularly if they feel like you're one of the more aggressive players at the table who's involved in a lot of hands and isn't going to go away. You can get them to leave. So I think you need to be careful. And what I would say too is that it probably depends on location and time of the day in terms of how fit or full the players are going to be. The later, if you're playing at noon on a Friday or a Thursday, fit or fold is going to be something completely different than a fit or fold player at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night.
Yep, that's well said. We got a comment from Chip Extractor here saying ABC play is not necessarily a bad thing. In tough games, he's more likely to default to solid play than to go crazy with exploits. Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point. That's right. Kim?
Yeah, sorry, I had to pop out for a sec, but I
All
caught
good.
something as I was walking out about players not opening as much or tighter when they're ABC, and I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think
Yeah.
a lot of ABC players really know their ranges and they open with the right ranges, but then they're ABC post flop.
Yeah.
So they may still make a C bet, whether they have it or not, but then they won't go any further if they don't have it. Or sometimes they'll just check if they don't hit anything. Like it's fit or fold post flop. But I don't think they're necessarily all like the limp. I don't think you can put the limp. They can be aggressive players and they can also be limp callers.
Yeah.
That are both of them can be ABC.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. All right, so then let's talk. We're going to save our more aggressive players for the end of the conversation here. But what about actual crazy people? And I don't mean just like wildly aggressive raising, but like very unpredictable people, drunk people, people that are under the influence of something. Who People who have like decided that they're gonna have some kind of like role at the table and are acting, they're making decisions that are not based on the equity in the hand. Uh, I'm sure well, I must not be the only person that's encountered this type of player. Here, Joe, you unmuted. What's your sense of this?
Well, honestly, I mean, I think this is the hardest player for me to play against because I know how when people come and do really unusual things at the table, I just wonder what the rest of their life is like. So I tend to not be good at taking advantage. Now, if you're more evil or cynical than I am, or see this game as more transactional, then this is a population. You just have to recognize that anything is possible. And if you were playing against a random card generator, right, you would, and you had strong hands, you'd bet them, and if you had weak hands, you'd fold, right? So that's all you need to do. That, or at least that's how I play against them, because on average, you're going to win. But similar to the loose passive player who's a calling station who's a little more controlled about it, it's a strap in, right? Get the seatbelt on, because you're going to play. If you're going to play, you're going to play a high variance. They're not going to fold. They're going to put a ton of money in, which is what you want when you have a strong range. But you're going to get blasted by some large pot, and you may not get that money back. But it's really the people that you want to play against if your goal is really to make a lot of money in poker.
And I'll ask the panel here, and I'll also ask the YouTube chatters. If you could choose, would you rather play against the old man coffee player type, the calling station player type, or this kind of spewy maniac player type? And I mean, some of that comes down to, what style of poker do you want to play today? Because, they have various degrees of strapping in, let's say. Here, Kim, what's your thought on that?
100% against the maniac in a cash game, 100% against the limp caller in a tournament.
Yep. Because and I want, so let's explain to our audience a little bit. So in a cash game, Kim, you're saying you can afford to just buckle up and call down and get the chips in against light ranges because you can just reload at any time and you're not putting your tournament life on the line. And I think, Joe made a great point that a lot of you can win some huge pots against these players and you will lose some huge pots against these players if you take this line. You'll win more big pots than you'll lose because they're playing less responsibly than you are. But variance is a thing, and you don't get to control which ones are which. So it's definitely a much higher variance opponent. Kim.
Yeah, tournaments are all about accumulation. So when someone's just limp and calling and we're just winning all their dead chips all the time, or a lot of the time, or a high percentage of the time, we're doing some chip accumulation. But when you're playing against these drunk maniacs, a cash game, yeah, you might get it in and good and then lose, but it's
Right.
like you're down to 10 big blinds, you just take it back up to 100, and now you felt them, right? So it's uh, a style that you can take advantage of in a cash game that you can't, or I can't really. I don't like to afford to do that in a tournament.
Right. John, then Joe. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate, the maniacs are definitely, you will have some wild times at the maniacs table. I mean, there was one time I was playing, there were two maniacs on the table, and I was down 4 buy-ins. This was a cash game, and I ended up leaving up 8 buy-ins. So hugest swing I have ever made in my life. And and that you just have to be prepared for it. You have to make sure you're in a good mental spot for it. I mean, I think what me buying in for that 4th buy-in when I
Right.
was down is very questionable, may not have been well advised. Turned out okay, but you still have to pay attention to those types of things. But you can really make some big money there.
Yep. Joe?
I think the two other things that I would say about maniacs is first and foremost, maniacs aren't watching what you're doing, right? They're generally not, if they're we haven't talked about aggressive players, but you really have to decide whether or not the alcohol and the way that they're playing is true, right? It's like, oh, I didn't look at my hands. Did they? Make sure. Right. That's very different than the true crazy person. But usually you can start to tell after a few hands. But if they are a true maniac, they're probably not paying attention to what you do. So you can be very careful. And if you really want to play the confidence game, you can look at your hand and then say, yeah, I didn't look at my hand, right? Lying is a part of poker, right? And you can be really strong. And then suddenly you're putting huge amounts of money in and you're probably pretty far ahead. So I do think that's important. But the other thing is maniacs of this type actually make most of the other players who don't want that style, right? They didn't come to throw all of their money in on the flop or against somebody that's not looking. Some players do, but there's a large swath of players who don't. And what you can do, again, if you're somewhat evil, is you can start to recruit them into a context so that you know what they have. So if you have a mid-strength hand that you're going to go to the felt for because you've got it, but then all of a sudden somebody else comes in and has been fuming the whole time, throws their money into there and says, yeah, they want to felt this guy. They're not going to bluff him, right? They're throwing in because they suddenly hit. Get the hell out of that pot, right? And use the information you're pulling from somebody else in order to be able to exploit and keep yourself from suffering the variance, the 4 buy-ins that John had to go through. Use that information because it doesn't always have to be the target of what you're looking at where you can get some information to help you out.
I love that. And also, look around the table and see who are the other thoughtful players at the table. Who are the other people at the table who are observing and modifying their own game to exploit these other player tendencies there. Because if there's a player, for instance, let's use one of these tight passive players, or one of these, let's just say we have a player who we've noticed limps and folds to raises a lot. So what's going to happen is other players at the table are going to notice, hey, this guy limps and then folds to raises a lot. They're going to say to themselves, I'm now going to start raising over their limps with more speculative hands, with more blocker hands, with weaker hands. And some of those hands are not going to be able to respond to three bets or re-raises. So you, as the savvy player, can go one level deeper and say, oh, okay, well, this player over here is limping and folding too much. This player over here has caught on to that and they're starting to isolate them more widely. That means that I can now start re-raising over that isolation raise with an even wider range of hands because their isolation raise has a lot of hands that have to fold. Um, just sort of like the counter of what Joe's talking about there, where the very aggressive player acts and someone else who's been biding their time, waiting for their moment to bust this maniac, now gets into the hand. You can be pretty sure that they have a very strong hand. Um, and so I think that's a really good way to out level some of the other players there. You always want to be playing at a table where you're one of the best players at the table. Like that's the first key to poker. If you sit at the table and after a few orbits you can't tell who are the people making the wide passive mistakes, who are the people making the aggressive mistakes, who are the players that are just too tight. You need to find a better table, bud. Because finding out what your opponents are doing wrong and exploiting that is a very important part of poker. We always say like, oh, play your own game, and you should play your own game, but you should know where the edges of your game are and where you can deviate, where you can push those edges to exploit the mistakes that other players are making at the table. Joe?
Yeah, I would just say though, what you said is pretty high level poker, right? To be able
Yeah.
to look and know everything. And for a lot of rec players, a lot of the time, this was true for me when I started. I mean, I sat down at the table and I knew I was the worst player at the table, and I wasn't going to find any other table there where I wasn't the worst player at the table.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
it takes some time to kind of maneuver through that. But I think that if you start small, right?
Mhm.
Like, so finding one particular player type that you're going to exploit, and it makes it a little more boring. You can't play all the hands. You can't really get in there and fight against all these different types. But say you identify, a OMC, right? That's the typical, and say, well, this is the way I'm going to exploit them, or somebody who's very loose passive, who you've made friends with, and you can exploit them throughout. If you can exploit one player, you can do more things at the table and start learning how to do all of this. Don't feel like you have to take it all on at once, because you'll be overwhelmed, and then you'll be frustrated because you didn't play four-dimensional chess at the poker table and beat players who've been doing this for longer than you.
Yeah, great point. Great point. We are going to talk about sort of like tight, aggressive players in just a minute here. So, and some of like the best players out there fall into this tight, aggressive, loose, aggressive. What am I trying to say? Stereotype, cliche player type. But I want to just follow up on some other comments we've gotten in the YouTube chat here first. So Phil says he doesn't like playing against dude bros lifting weights at the table. That's a very particular player type. Coffee Guy says Hubie. Mike says I like seeing more flops versus this type with hands that play very well post flop. So I think this is against our calling station player type, and that's right because you can make very strong hands and get paid against these calling stations. So that makes a lot of sense. Um, Stations and limp callers are the ones that Mike would prefer to play against. Phil says, I like playing against the dude bros and getting them tilted. And then I run away when they came after me with a broken beer bottle. And I was like, Phil, you don't know that they're a dude bro that's tilted just because they're coming after you with a broken beer bottle. Lots of people come after you with broken beer bottles. That's just a characteristic of your personality. Um, Neil says, at low stakes, I personally don't think many players even notice when people limp fold. Yeah, great point. Great point. And I want to commend Neil on this one because Rob Washam always keeps me grounded on this because I get a little projecty sometimes. And I start thinking when I'm at the table, oh, this is what I would do in this spot. Oh, this would be a great place to make this bluff with like the ace blocker or that kind of thing. And Rob is very kind to keep me in line and just say, no, Jim, they just have it. Sometimes they just have it. Don't project this level of sophistication on these low stakes players. They're not bluffing that thoughtfully. They're not taking advantage of your weak image. They're not paying attention to the run out, seeing that it favors their range and not your range, so taking a good spot to bluff. And they're just not really paying that much attention to other players' ranges and other players' actions. So we can outlevel ourselves if we kind of come in all clever and fancy with our exploits here. And it turns out all we really needed was a strong hand and a big size. That's usually the best way to win, which is what we were kind of talking about this earlier about, folding as an art at these low stakes, and bluffing is something that can get you into more trouble. You really just pedal the nuts, make strong hands, get paid with your value. That's typically the way to beat low stakes. Joe?
Yeah, and I think that this is a concept I've talked with some people online, but it's this concept of diminishing returns, right?
Hmm.
We talk a lot about studying a great deal. And when you look at most learning curves in terms of the amount of information, the amount of benefit that you receive from it, you get most of your benefit when you're learning something at the very beginning, right? Because you separate, and these very basic skills will help you to learn how to beat, how to do something at a higher rate. In poker, it's how to beat more player types or to win more frequently. The further along that curve that you get, the longer you study and the more that you study, you don't actually gain as much benefit as you move along. So a lot of the very basic things that are being talked about here in terms of exploits are going to very directly and very immediately have a pretty big impact. Just don't expect that you'll continue to have that sort of impact the more that you study. And I think that's very helpful, because understand that cementing these basics in terms of these exploits and even basic GTO principles will have a huge impact in terms of your game, and put you in that range of 20, 15, 10%, whatever it is, of players that can make money and have a shot at being able to really win consistently.
Yep. Well said. So there's a great comment here from Joseph Walton, talking about relative position and saying, get up and move to an open seat to the left of an aggressive player, and or move to another table if there's not an open seat. And I really want to reinforce this point. If you're playing in a card room, typically there's going to be multiple tables, and there's nothing wrong with asking for a table change. And I think newer players are a little uncomfortable with seat changes and table changes, and kind of like, oh, what are they going to think when I move over to that table, or if I leave this table or something? Forget that. Listen, use every arrow in your quiver. Use every tool in the armory to get an advantage at the poker table. And if you're not in a good seat, get out of that seat. And here's how you can tell if you're in a good seat. Are there experienced, savvy, aggressive players to your left? Guess what? You're not in a great seat. If I could draw it up, if I could draw up a perfect table, I would say I want the old man coffees to my left and the maniacs to my right. I want to be on the button when the old man coffee's in the blinds so I can steal the blinds. I want them on my left to be folding every time I open. And I want those players on my right to be getting out of line, to be making huge bets and raises with wide ranges and weak hands before I have to act. And now I get to just decide to only continue when I have really strong hands, or whatever it is that I'm looking for. Typically, in that case, it's going to be really strong hands. The worst situation you can be in is to have the tight players to your right, where you never get to benefit from them folding pre-flop all the time. It's true, you do get to play some speculative hands when they open. You can just call behind them and try and crack their aces. But it's much better to have them to your left. And you really just do not want that aggressive player to your left who's going to be raising over limps all the time, who's going to be three betting your opens all the time. We talked about this with Carlos Welch on the show a little while ago, just a few weeks ago, about how being in facing a three bet is an inherently not profitable position. Okay. If you have Poker Tracker 4 or Hold'em Manager and you run reports, you can filter for hands where you're facing a three bet. And I guarantee you are a losing player in that spot. It's just like playing out of the big blind. Even if you play perfectly out of the big blind, you're typically going to be a losing player playing out of the blinds, because you're posting all these hands blind, you're playing out of position. So the best players in the world, they're not trying to be winning players out of the blinds. They're just trying to lose less than everybody else. And that's the same way that we should approach facing three bets. So if we're going to be in a position where we are facing three bets a lot, we should probably find a different position. And if that means changing a seat at the table to get the aggressive players to your right, do it. And if that seat isn't available, move to a different table. And I don't care at all if the people think that you're doing it because you like don't want to play with them, or if like, you're not good enough, or I don't curse on the show unless the guests curse first. So no, they're not here to curse first, but you can imagine me getting a little salty here when I say, forget those guys and gals. And I don't care at all what they have to say. And you shouldn't either. Go get the table change button, go sit at a different table. I guarantee you the worst thing you can do is just continue playing in a bad seat where there's good aggressive players to your left. Don't do it. All right, let's see. We've got some or here, Joe. Yeah, you want to
Just really quickly, because I know you want to move on to aggressive players, but along those lines, if people keep trying to seat change to sit on your left, leave. Get out of the casino. Come on back another day. They've identified you. They're going to follow you wherever you go. You're doing something that they know, and just it's okay to get out of that situation. You don't have to try to put up with somebody that's targeting you.
That's right. And don't take it personally. Like they're not picking on you because they don't like your hair color, or like, you made fun of. Well, it might be. That's a good point, Joe. We don't know why. But typically what they're doing is it's your actions, it's your ranges. They want to be on the left of players who you must be making some of these mistakes that we've been talking about here on the show. You're probably opening too wide, so you have to fold too much. So they want to be in position on you so they can be the one three betting and scooping those pots and making you fold. So yeah, you should. A lot of this, one of the toughest things about poker is knowing what your own mistakes are. And that's why it's so important to join a group like RecPoker, a free group like this, to share information with your peers and get honest feedback and have your assumptions challenged. Like it's the hardest thing in the world for us to just play poker and just on our own think about our play and develop as a player. It's like that's not how you get better at poker. You can't challenge your own assumptions. You're not a reliable narrator. You're making all sorts of mistakes that you're being results oriented and you're not seeing the mistakes that you're making. So find some people to talk poker with, whether it's here at RecPoker or another group like that, some friends, whoever it is. You need to get other people talking to you about poker. Okay, we're going to catch up on a few more of these YouTube comments, then we'll race through some aggressive players and close out today's show, because this has been a banger so far. I'm loving this. We got, and then, oh yeah, and start typing the words food bank into the YouTube chat now, folks. We will do a draw at the end. So if folks don't know, we like to support food banks here at RecPoker. And so we're going to give away a prize for free to someone at the end of the episode. All they have to do is type the words food bank into the YouTube chat. So start typing the words food bank into the YouTube chat now, and then we'll pick a winner in just a few minutes. Phil says he only plays in tournaments, not cash games, so no seat changes for him. Neil, thank you for the kind words. Yeah, please join us anytime. Joe Walton says, yeah, the aggressive bettor will know you know what you're doing if you move to their left. It's true, but this is one of those things where I think the strength of the position is worth more than the like disguise of why are you there or not. You know what I mean? Even if they know that that's why you're doing it, what are they going to do? Change their play style completely and stop being an aggressive player because there's a savvy player to their left? Maybe that would be the smart thing to do, but that's not, players aren't generally, poker players aren't good at making those adjustments. Hubie says we should all be wearing name tags with player type tag. That would make things a lot more convenient, Hubie. If we could just use my HUD color coding system, that would save a lot of time for everybody. Great point. Neil says, money flows to the left. You want the spewy players to your right. Good, loose, aggressive players on your right can actually be tough because they lock out of pots and force you to play tight. That is a good point. So if you've got passive players across the table from you and aggressive players on your right, they'll end up taking that isolation line against the weaker players more often, which means that you don't get to. So you kind of have to play that spot, that role of just being the tighter player who's going to only get involved because you're no longer worried about the weak tight players. You're now worried about these aggressive players on your right. But this is a good spot for that leveling exploit that I was talking about earlier, where now you have an aggressive player who's keyed into a tight player. So they're being even more aggressive, which means that they're playing even wider ranges, which means that you can re-steal in spots like that even more widely. So you don't actually have to just pedal the nuts in that spot. I'm just going to push back on that a little bit there, Neil, because you if they're thinking players, you got to just like, find that level. But yeah, money flows from right to left, which is why it's just one of those things. It's one of the position matters so much in this game. Um, and Neil says, yeah, generally not going to run into that at low stakes. Yeah, good point. Good point. Um, and Mike says he color codes after 25 to 50 hands if a player type is probably yeah, that's right. Yeah, and usually uh I like to kind of categorize players by the mistakes that they make, which is sort of what we're getting into here. So, like on my HUD, red just means that they make folding mistakes. They fold too much. Green means they make calling mistakes. They call too much. And orange means they make aggression mistakes. They bet or raise too much. Um, and that's how we kind of shape our play against these opponents. That's very dumbed down. Like that's very general, but that is the way you want to think about it, I think. And people tend to make the same kind of mistakes throughout the hand. Passive players, players that like to limp and call raises and see flops, they tend to also play passive post flop. So you can infer, you can extrapolate based on limited information, even if you don't get, several hundred hands on a player. I like that Mike's saying, yeah, you can kind of get a sense after a few orbits of what kind of mistakes are these players generally making. Okay, so let's talk about the players that we don't want to see. Or John, sorry, was there something else you wanted to jump into?
Well, I was just wondering if you've ever brought like colored Sharpies to the poker room so that you could color code people, just ask them to hold their hands out. And I was wondering if that'd be a viable way to handle it since you don't have your HUD there.
Or maybe like a paintball gun that you
Yeah.
could just discreetly target them from across the table.
You could also do Dowie kinds of color, the color celebration and just throw.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
There you go. Lots of ways to assault people at the table. For I will say, John, for the when I was playing in the main event this year. Oh God, I love saying that. That's such a fun. Oh man, I love saying that. Anyway, when I was playing in the World Series of Poker main event this year, when you get a table draw for the next day, I had some friends like Mark Pershawn and some other great folks that were sort of doing a little research for me, and so they'd send me a message with the names of the players at my table and some notes about their experience level. And so I had a screenshot of my phone going into every new day at the table where I had players color coded on this little screenshot between green and red based on how experienced they were, whether they were going to get out of line or not, if I could apply pressure to them, or if they were the kind of player that was going to be applying pressure to me. And yeah, it's just a little color coded, can't hurt. Yeah, Mike Day says, or a multicolored pen with a notebook. Yeah, exactly. Cool. Oh, we could talk about this forever. I wonder, should we even, maybe we'll save the aggressive player. Let's just highlight it quickly. We'll save some real deep exploits against these aggressive players for a future show. But ultimately, what it comes down to is aggressive players are this is why we saved them for last. These are the toughest players to exploit. These tight aggressive, loose aggressive players. They're not maniacs, so they're not getting out of line, but they're not taking a lot of passive actions. And generally, they're playing well-balanced ranges, and they're just doing it in an aggressive fashion. And so they're just adding fold equity into every hand that they play. They're adding an uncapped range into every hand that you take with them post-flop. And if you are playing consistently against another player, and they're the one that's aggressive and you're the one that's passive, it's just a huge advantage for them. That dynamic is going to result in some of that money flowing from you to them, just like we talked about, playing out of the blinds, facing three bets, being out of position. These are inherently unprofitable positions. So I guess I'll put it out to Kim and John and Joe and anyone in the YouTube chat before we wrap this up. And we did talk to Carlos about this a little bit. What are some ways that we can defend against these players? How can we exploit these players? And I mean, the first one is that we can start by tightening up a little pre-flop in our opening ranges. And the benefit of this is that when they do three bet or when they do take aggressive lines post flop, we have fewer hands in our range that we have to just fold. Just weaker hands never make it to that point in the hand. So we don't have to fold them after we've invested money in the pot. We can fold them before we've invested money in the pot. And so folding can actually be an exploit. Folding can actually be a way of profiting in a non-reciprocal way. If other players are going to open and fold to a three bet and you just fold instead because you can kind of see the three bet coming, then in effect you've made some chips there, even though you just by not losing them. It's addition by addition of subtraction by a subtraction of subtraction. We're getting into double or triple negatives here. What about you, Joe, John, Kim? Talk about sort of having an aggressive player on your left.
Well, I think I'm sorry, I was the only one that unmuted, right? So
Yeah.
I think that this is going to be a good player, right? In general, even if they've learned how to use aggression to their advantage, it's a better player than somebody who's loose and passive, who you've got identified and who you can push around. You're just not going to be able to push them around in a lot of the different ways. And the more passive and the more inexperienced you are, the harder it is to play against them. So again, in the same way, talking about the loose passive player and managing tilt when they get there, you have to recognize who this player type is and manage your own expectations about what you can do against them. Because they probably are a little better as a poker player. They're going to understand how, they're understanding a little bit about how you may be playing, or at least how everybody else at the table will respond to the aggression that they put out. And if they're really good, then it's a player you just want to avoid, right? Don't play with them. You don't have to play hands with people if you choose not to, for the most part. And not playing king jack suited on a board when there's a three bet and you know that you're going to have to bet a lot of money to push this player around, which you're going to have to get there. That reduces the amount that you're going to win. And if you're going to have to fold it out, well, as Jim says, tightening up and just not playing with that individual is probably a good idea.
Yeah. Rob?
I agree with that. Oh, sorry, Rob. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that if you have a tight or loose aggressive player to your right, one of the things that you can do is you can three bet him a little lighter. Okay. You can do it with a polarized range because they're going to believe you. If you have a hand like, let's say, ace jack. I hate ace jack. So what I'm going to do is if I got that type of player on my right, I'm going to three bet with my ace jack offsuit. And then if he then comes over the top, well, then I can easily fold. But a lot of times you get folds from them because they are using their aggression to get you to fold. And they don't always have pocket aces. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, Kim, you had something?
Yeah, I agree with Joe about staying out of these players' ways, but you're often in a tough situation when they're either immediate to your left or two to your left, and they don't always just raise you; they just always call or they raise. They just want to be in pots with you, and you know that they want to be in pots with you because they're better than you. So you can't just not play when they're always going to choose to be in pots with you. So that's where I would be trying to find an exploit. What they are, I don't know. But I guess tightening up is definitely one. And I guess you have to resort to the old realization when you're out of position mode and sort of play more passively versus those kinds of players when you're out of position against them. So then you keep their bluffs in,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And you are going to lose more chips that are going to flow over that way. But that's the type of player that I have the toughest time against. That they always want to be in the pot when me or my friend on the right that I'm trying to be in a pot with is
Right.
and they're either calling or they're raising. So, I have a limper on my right. Oh, I'm gonna raise. Now they're just gonna call me. Or they may I or this person raises, now I'm gonna be in the pot with them and I'm gonna call, now they're gonna raise. And it's just makes your life a living hell when you have one of these players on your or two on your left.
Yeah.
And you can't always avoid them. When I have a player like I know that's a really good player across the table, I just try to stay out of pots with them.
Yeah.
But it's just impossible if they're on your immediate left or to your left. So I don't have an answer. I just have all the questions.
Yeah, right. And of course, and so you can see that like at a nine-handed table, it's less of a problem than at a six-handed table. At a six-handed table, you're much more likely to be in pots with that player. So having more room available helps. Joe, you had something I think there.
Yeah, and I do think that this has, as Kim said before about the difference between cash games and tournaments, is that,
Mm,
in a cash game, you never have to actually lose money to that player. You can just leave. And sometimes
right.
that actually is just the best thing. I mean, if that player is so much better than you and is going to make your life a living hell, staying in that game is, I don't want to say silly, but it's self-defeating because you'll just feel worse about your game as you go on, and it's so much easier to lose money in poker than it is to win money. It's like gaining versus losing weight, right? It's really hard to lose weight, but it's not that hard to gain weight. But if you can stop yourself from losing a ton of money at the table, your overall income for that, or at least, minimizing that loss is going to be better for you overall. In a tournament, though, you can't do that, right? You have to be able to try to figure out how to play them because you can't change seats. You can't just get up and say, I'll play later when that person's busted out. And you can't just sit there forever because, as Kim, well, she didn't say, but you'll just blind out. So I do want players to understand, though, forcing yourself into that situation, particularly if you're just learning, don't do it because you'll just be frustrated and upset and feel like your game is worse than it actually is because you're just playing the top of the heap in terms of some of the player types we've talked about.
Yep. When I was playing in the WSOP main event earlier this year, there was this. I was sitting at a table with Adrian Mateos, Adam Friedman, at least one other like world famous poker player that had his own camera crew there for him. And for like the last 2.5 hours of day four, I think I played two hands. It was just like, nope, I'm just not there. I'm gonna find a better table tomorrow. I was at a better table earlier today. Like, I'm just not gonna try to outplay these guys. And luckily, I had enough chips that I could just sort of sit it out. I knew I'm going to get a new table in 2.5 hours. And with a deep structure like that, you can actually afford to just like throttle back and blind out a little bit. And I think that was a good decision. Yeah, Kim.
I have found that if you have the opportunity to make a really good play at the table, whether it's calling down somebody's river bet, huge river bet when you just have third pair, fourth pair, or ace high and being right,
Mm-hmm.
or whether it's making a play and making someone fold a better hand, that if someone sees these players see you do that and you get that respect at the table, they will pick on you a lot less often. Then you will
True.
get a lot more respect. So if you can find the spot for that, it's valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So if folks we got to wrap this up shortly. I've really been enjoying this conversation. If folks want to hear more about defending against three bets and playing against aggressive players on your left, I'd recommend you check out our recent episode with Carlos Welch. I think it was episode 609 or 611, something like that. It was in the last few weeks. Because we get into some of the details about what kind of hands you might want in various situations there. The only other thing I'll say on this point is I really like Rob's point, and we got a comment from this in the YouTube chat as well from Mike Day saying that when these players are on your right, you should open up your own three betting range and your four betting range a little bit and try and take advantage of the wider ranges that they're taking, those aggressive lines that they're taking. When they're to your left, it's a difficult dynamic to play in. aggressive players are the least like what am I trying to say? It's the play style that you are going to be the least comfortable playing against, exploiting, because basically the only way you don't want to be opening and then folding to three bets. You really don't want to be opening and then calling three bets either. That just postpones the point in the hand at which they're going to use their range advantage and your capped range to win the pot. Now you're going to lose a bigger pot than if you just folded pre-flop. So you gotta have to fight fire with fire a little bit, and that means four betting when they three bet you. And you're not going to be able to just do that with premium hands. So you have to, one of the only ways to exploit these aggressive players is by being aggressive yourself, taking these four bet lines with less than premium hands. A, you're going to win some pots pre-flop, but B, more importantly, you might slow them down a little for the next while in the game if they get the sense that you are not just playing ABC, that you're not just playing fit or fold. You'll be a less attractive target for their aggression if you can also bring some aggression back to them. Kim and then Joe.
Yeah, you just need to be careful that you know where they're raising from. So you may have a player tagged as super aggressive because they always raise when they're in the hijack cutoff button.
Right.
Okay. And now you want to make a play against them because you have a mediocre hand and they just raise from under the gun.
Right.
So just be aware that even aggressive players do get premium hands.
Yes. And just because someone's been three betting a lot for that orbit doesn't even mean that they're necessarily an aggressive player. Sometimes they're just getting good hands for a little while. So you got to be careful about that. Great point, Kim. Yeah, Joe.
So I just to kind of finish up, because I think you were trying to wrap up, is they're actually that's not actually the hardest player type. The hardest player type that is going to be the one who can play all of those different styles and changes it up on you on the basis of what you're doing. Those are the players that you really want to worry about, because they may be throwing a lot of different speeds at you because they're responding to what it is that you are. And I don't think that these are very common players, but I've seen them, and those are the ones that frighten me the most.
Yeah, chameleons, we'll call them, because they can really adjust. Or I don't know, is an octopus? They're very contortionists. We'll find an animal. We'll find an animal that's appropriate for this and get in there. But yeah, the players that can change it up.
Octopuses can change their color, as well as they have a lot of different hands and different ways.
Right.
So, and they're pretty smart. So I think maybe the octopus.
The octopus.
Although aren't we advertising now for another poker?
Oh yeah, they have another one. Okay, well we'll take this back into the production shed and see what we can come up with. But yeah, that's okay. Well, this has been super fun. I really enjoyed our YouTube chatters today. Let's see, we got some more comments here. I'll just hit them out quickly. Mike Day says the tag players like putting pressure on people with a big stack. That's right. Phil says the best players are tag in early position and lag in late position. That's a great point. Joseph says about a previous point, but don't take this exploit until they know what your range is. Otherwise, they'll treat you like the rest of the table and presume they can aggressively push you around. Yes, exactly. Like we're talking about. Who's paying attention to who's paying attention? It's sort of like one of these things. It's like you don't want to be too sophisticated against the players that are not themselves very sophisticated. So do that right. Mike says he likes what Rob says about three betting them lighter. And no, Phil, I did not say hi to you, Adrian Mateos from you, although I did say hi to him from Chris Jones. So I guess you have to take that as a personal slight. That's I have nothing else to say about that. All right, John Somsky, why don't you roll us through some recent home game wins, and then we're going to roll a die and give away a prize to support a local food bank and get on out of here.
All right, on August 14th, Marbles Jam won the mixed event. This is we play it the second Wednesday of every month, and we keep track of your scores for the entire year. And whoever has highest score at the end of the year wins the Player of the Year race. And currently, apple of my eye, Harold Berry is in the lead in that Player of the Year race.
Nice.
On August 12th, E. Anderson Eric 85, Eric Anderson won his second TOC victory of the year.
Whoa! Way to go, Eric Anderson! Holy
Now,
cow!
He probably should have saved one for next year because he only gets one silver pin because he won a TOC there. But that's still a very impressive feat. I know you're showing it off. I still have yet to win one. Then we have Pet 33. Kim Kilroy won her third nightly victory of the year. Com Binkley, Eric Jin got his second nightly victory of the year. Poker Cat 36, Naomi Pazol got her first nightly victory of the year.
Way to go, Naomi.
Keck Geek got his third nightly victory of the year. Benny, and that's Keck Geek Senior for those keeping track. Benny and the Jet 96 got his first nightly victory. Oslo Burger Tron Vidar Stensby got his third international victory for the year, and then Oslo Burger Tron Vidar Stensby got his fourth international victory of the year, sweeping the international events on Saturday.
Amazing.
And Ship and Flip Wreck Luke O'Driscoll won the LPP event, so he can contact info at rec.poker for his free month at Learn Pro Poker.
That's right. Congratulations, Luke, and to all our winners, but especially if you win on Sunday, the Play Money home games, they're free to enter. They cost nothing to play, but the prizes are real. It's not just these fancy, funky pens that you can wear, or pins that you can wear with pride, but you can also win real, cool, awesome prizes like a free month at Learn Pro Poker. So Luke, send that email, please, to info@rec.poker, and we'll get you all set up with your prize. Just a fantastic element of our Learning with Partners program here, where you can get connected with some of the best training sites and coaches around the world. Here, Rob, you had something there, I think.
Speaking of which, the Poker Forge is having a back-to-school sale. This guy says the kids are going back to school, so we should too. So his back-to-school sale, you can get your first month for only $25 and then $35 a month thereafter, which means you're saving a whole heck of a lot from even what you get with your RecPoker code. So it's an extra $13 off of that per month. So if you want to take advantage of this sale, you can go to the RecPoker website, go to resources, and then learning partners, and go to the Poker Forge, go into the sign up for it, but do not use your code RecPoker for this sale. Okay, you can just go right in and do the thing, and you'll get this sale price, and it's good through Friday. So don't waste any time. Get in there. Go to our website, go to resources, Learning with Partners, go to the Poker Forge, and sign up, but don't use the RecPoker code for this sale.
There you go. And if you're watching live, you've got all week to make it happen. This episode will come out on Friday, which is the last day of that sale. So if you're listening to this the day it comes out, you've still got all day to go and claim your fantastic prize. All right. I see we got 7 entrants in our food bank raffle, wrapping up with Joe Rafter. I've got an 8-sided die here. So we're going to do a roll.
Jim.
Yes.
So pick a number between 1 and 8.
8.
So any 8, and I'll give 20 towards the food bank.
What a guy. So the reason that we do this raffle is to sort of combat food insecurity and to help support hungry people around the world. And I think it's a great cause to support, whether you're right or left or what your religion is or what you believe. I think we can all agree that helping hungry people to eat is a good cause. And if you just pull your smartphone out of your pocket right now and Google food banks near me, you'll find a fantastic organization in your own neighborhood that can benefit from a few bucks out of your pocket, a few hours of your time volunteering, or a few non-perishable food items from your own pantry. And I'd encourage you to do that. You never know who might need a little extra help putting food on the table these days. It's a tough time in the world, and supporting your local food bank is a great way to do it. We got our last entrance in here. K Poker Wannabe is going to be number 8. So Joe, we're rooting for an 8, because not only do we get to send K Poker Wannabe a free month at Learn Pro Poker, but you are also going to donate $20 to support a local food bank. Thank you, Joe. And let's see who the winner is this week. It is a 7, Joe Rafter. Oh, wait, hold on a second. There's some confusion. I'm getting feedback in the YouTube chat. Is there 9? Hold on. All right. This is why we got to just list these out. Someone back me up here. I see in order Mike Day, CM Magic 62, Neil Jaworski, Hubie, Ginger, Joe Walton, Joe Rafter, K-Poker Wannabe. I see 8. I think that's 8, unless my math is off. Hubie, if I'm missing something from like an earlier, let me know. Email me, jim@rec.poker, and we will check it out. But Joe Rafter, you are no stranger to the winner's circle here at the Rec Poker podcast giveaway. So thanks for continuing to help us raise awareness about food insecurity and this fight against it and supporting a local food bank. Send an email, Joe, to info@rec.poker, and we will get you all sorted out. Yeah, no, sorry, Phil. You're way too late. We already did the draw. You've been bamboozled again, my friend. All right. Anything else? We're done, right? This has been super fun. I can't believe we went long on this one. Before the show, I was like, oh, we won't go too long. There's no guests. We'll just kind of like talk about what we love about poker and exploits. And this has been one of our longer episodes, of course. Thank you so much to our YouTube chatters. Thank you to the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Thank you to Kim and Rob and John and Joe, everyone at home, all our premium members, my mom. Thanks to everyone. We'll talk to you again sometime soon, hopefully next week on the Rec Poker Podcast. All right, have a great night, everybody. You take care.